further ado, I introduce Senator Burr from North Carolina. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and to my colleagues on the committee. I thank you for holding this hearing and for providing me the opportunity to testify about the Veterans Choice Improvement Act. I introduced this legislation with Senator Ayotte, Bozeman, Crapo, Daines, Hoeven, Moran, and Tillis. And it is my understanding, Mr. Chairman, as of right now, we have a bipartisan agreement. And that means hopefully there's an opportunity for this to be marked up in the context of your next markup legislation. It would be helpful if those who really aren't focused on veterans' health care would stand down and let us focus on substance in this bill that really does focus on the quality of care delivered and the efforts that the VA continues to make to provide that care for our veterans. In 2014, when I was the ranking of this committee, Congress passed the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act, which created the Veterans Choice Program to make sure our veterans get the health care they need and that they get it expeditiously. This legislation was in response to a systemic problem throughout the VA healthcare system that had been uncovered in early 2014. We recognized at the time that the only way to make certain that veterans got the care they needed was to enable them to go to the doctor outside the VA if, in fact, they were on a wait list or lived a certain distance from a VA facility. I was proud to help author the Veterans Choice Program, and I know that program has helped many veterans get health care without having to wait or to drive far. However, nearly 2 years later, veterans are still experiencing serious frustrations and delays in getting health care. Just this October, a CNN reporter found that appointment wait times at the VA were not getting better, even after billions of dollars flowed into the agency. I know every senator here today is hearing about these problems from veterans living in their own states. I certainly do, and let me give you an example. As recently as last month, Charlotte WBTV reported that a veteran named Jim Bancroft had waited more than a year to receive a referral from the VA to see a spine specialist. Mr. Bancroft was finally given a referral and allowed to see an outside specialist. But when Mr. Bancroft called to make the second appointment, he was told he could not see the doctor because the doctor was no longer accepting veterans under the Choice Act. Why? Because the VA had continually failed to pay the doctor for seeing veterans. This is just one example of thousands and why I introduced the Veterans Choice Improvement Act. We must fix this, and we must get it right for our veterans. The first problem that the Veterans Choice Improvement Act seeks to fix is the confusing nature of receiving care outside of the VA. Currently, the VA offers care to veterans outside of the VA through a number of different programs and contracts. The laws and regulations that govern these programs differ in substantial ways. And this is confusing to the veteran, confusing to the doctor, the hospitals, and oftentimes it's confusing to the VA itself. That's why the Veterans Choice Improvement Act consolidates all of these programs into one permanent program, the Veterans Choice Program. This program will be the one program for veterans to receive care in their community. It's designed to be easily understandable by the veterans so that they will know when they are eligible to go outside of the VA for care. The Veterans Choice Improvement Act will also make significant reforms to the VA medical claims and reimbursement process to make sure that medical providers get paid for the services they provide to our nation's veterans. This, in turn, will ensure veterans will be able to get the timely, quality health care they've earned. In North Carolina, we've already seen hospitals stop seeing veterans under the current Veterans Choice Program because the VA consistently failed to pay reimbursements for hospital services. I know this is a problem in other states as well, and that's why we reformed the claims process in this bill. We've set a standard for how long the VA has to reimburse a claim, and if they fail to meet the standard, interest begins to accrue on the claim. We require the Secretary to notify medical providers of what information a claim must contain for a quick reimbursement, and also notify providers if that information requires changes. We also mandate that the VA establish an electronic system to receive medical claims from outside providers, but we give the VA until 2019 to put that in place. That's more than sufficient time to get it right, even for the federal government. As the members of this committee know, the VA has had a significant accounting problem as more and more veterans have been allowed to receive care outside the VA. In May 2015, the VA came to Congress and told us that they may have a funding problem, but that they were not really sure. And so they hired outside accounting firms to help them understand what was happening. Then in late July 2015, the VA came back and informed us that they were nearly $3 billion short in their medical services account for the fiscal year. The VA also told us that unless Congress allowed for reprogramming of funds out of the Veterans Choice Act, the VA would be forced to close hospitals. Congress, of course, allowed for the reprogramming in order to keep the VA medical facilities open. But to say that such incidents are unacceptable is a gross understatement. In the Veterans Choice Improvement Act, we make an effort to fix these accounting issues so that the incidents like the one I just described do not happen again. The Veterans Choice Program will be funded through a single appropriation account, and that funding will be provided a year in advance. This should help clear up some of the accounting issues and provide more transparency for congressional and for public oversight. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Senators Hoeven and Manchin for their legislation on provider agreements, which is part of this bill. I believe that this will make a real difference for veterans who live in rural America. These provider agreements will allow the VA to have a standing agreement with local doctors and hospitals to provide certain medical services to our nation's veterans. This will alleviate the burden on veterans who currently have to travel distances for minor medical issues that can easily be addressed closer to home. There is simply no reason that veterans are driving 4 and 5 hours each way to get a new pair of eyeglasses. I give a great deal of credit to Senator Crapo for passionately advocating for veterans in Idaho and telling me the story of how veterans there were driving 3 and 4 hours to Salt Lake City to get fitted for hearing aids when there's a private hospital just down the road that could easily do the same thing. We can do better for our veterans. That's why I also give the VA credit for requesting this ability and acknowledging that this is necessary and will help our nation's veterans. I'll close by saying this, that the Veterans Choice Improvement Act will help veterans across America get the best health care we have to offer. And they get it without having to wait long or to drive far, regardless of whether they live in an urban area or a rural town. This bill will help all. Mr. Chairman, I also want to thank Senator Tester. We have worked aggressively over the last week to put together a bipartisan bill, and I was told before I walked in the door that we are there. And I'm sure he'll have an opportunity to speak, and he can reconfirm that. Our effort is simply this: to help through the VA and through this wonderful medical infrastructure that we have in this country, make sure that veterans receive the highest quality of care. This is not an attempt to eliminate, to bypass. It's to put together the best health care system that we can provide for those who have given of themselves for this country. I thank the chair, I thank the ranking member, I thank my